All right, good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Good. How are you? It's still early in the morning. You've already had your coffee, right? Okay, all right. I see some friendly faces out there. I also see some other faces. We've got a great panel set up for y'all today. It's a Warrant Officer technical panel. We'll be going over EW from the FLOT all the way back, and we're going to start off with each one of our panel members. 3 minutes of saying anything they want to say, introducing themselves, talking about themselves, what they do, where they are, where they're working. I have to apologize up front. There is a mistake on the slide. Chief McDougall was unable to attend, so he recommended according to him and me, a far better replacement. And it is Chief Joa, who is sitting right here. He is going to be taking his place. We just didn't get the picture up there in time. However, if you go to the FCA website, everyone's full bios are in there, and you can read all about them, okay? To start this off, we will go with Chief Joa.
Good morning. Chief Joa, I'm 101st Division Artillery Net Tech. I'm currently at WOAC and about to graduate. A lot of my classes here. Hi guys, thanks for coming. So 101st is, we're kind of on the spot right now going through C2 fix. I know I just came from the C2 Agile briefing and it was very good. A lot of the remarks that were said were very, very true. There's a lot of things that are coming out of 101st that are important, and we're kind of filtering a lot of the things that are going to come to the force with the C2 Next efforts, and when units start receiving this equipment, don't be surprised when you see it working okay and it's not working at all, because 101st has been going through the reps on it. 2BCT is right now in the box, and they're doing their thing. They're testing all the things that came out of OLE 24.1 in April that I was a part of, and I'll be here to talk on that. So,
Chief Eason.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm CW5 Travis Eason. Not really going to talk about myself too much, but so one of the key questions that I had on this set of notes that I put together was, why do we exist? From an EW perspective, we exist to drive rapid decision making and action. What I mean by that is we provide information regarding where targets are located within the EMS, physical location on the ground, what their identifications are, and those type of things. And then the action piece is the either lethal or non-lethal fires. So we coordinate electromagnetic attack and enable steel on target in some cases. Does EW operate by itself? No, we're in partnership with SIGINT. I'm glad that Nate Watkins is here to help clarify some stuff. But at the end of the day, we don't face the enemy alone. We work together. In depth, what we have to go through is identifying those targets within the EMS. Is not an easy task. You can do a lot of visual, audio recognition of certain things, but when we get targets that are very similar, you have to start doing some analytics, and that's where our 17 Echo, 170 Bravos do triage type activities, and our Intel folks pick up the ball and get into the in-depth piece, which also informs some reprogramming efforts. One concept that I have on here is not all data is of value. What I mean by that, from DC to daylight within the EMS, there's a tremendous amount of information passing over the spectrum. That means that we have targets and we have non-targets within that space. So when we start talking about EW systems, we need to take in mind there are targets out there. There are times where we need to do full take on parts of the spectrum, and times where we need to target very specific things. That'll help us design our systems better so that we're not going out and having a full rack of systems within an EW vehicle or platform that can't handle like the volume that we're throwing at it. So we need to be very specific. Automation is going to help out with that. So what kind of data is right? I guess it depends on what's happening. So if we're doing an EMS survey where we don't know anything about anything in the spectrum, then that full take type mentality is probably appropriate. However, as I mentioned before, we start narrowing it down to targets. That helps us out with the amount of data that we need to transport. And if we do prioritization of things, if we go back to the purpose of why we're here, targeting is one of the primary reasons that EW is around. So if we think about what kind of data needs to pass over the net, metadata enables the decision makers and the targeteers to do their job, so that it doesn't take a tremendous amount of information to do that. Once we get into what is that emitter, we get into IQ data, which is more voluminous and more dense. So then we have to start digging into maybe there are times where we do a store and forward type mission when it's allowed, or a store and bring it back to the base and then do our analytics on it from there. That leads into one of the efforts that we have going on, reprogramming. Reprogramming is a central piece of having a successful EW capability out on the front end. As we look at the EMS, we're expecting a lot of change in the environment. Software-defined radio is very prevalent across the board for both military and non-military use. That means things can change pretty rapidly in the environment. We need to be able to respond to that as quickly as we can. I have a series of challenges here. I'll just highlight some of them. Policy, I already kind of mentioned the equipment. Training is always a big thing. And then our ability to have a standard data format. Something that CyberQuest 24 highlighted was having a standardized format that it allows interoperability and integration of systems. So we're not sitting there having to do translation after translation of whatever it is that we're forwarding or sharing data. The other piece of that is, of course, classification. We're trying to do things at the SBU level as much as possible. So there may be some policy things that we have to adjust or highlight to make sure that that can happen. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Grant Cornell. Just coming from 25th Infantry Division as the senior EW tech out there and now at the schoolhouse. So a lot of these notes that I'm going to cover from our observations or my opinion as it relates to it. I'm going to provide some reinforcing fires to Chief Eason's point. 25th Infantry Division last year conducted a 9-nation joint partner ally exercise, JPMRC in the Pacific, where we fought that entire fight at SBUE. Which is demonstrative, I think, of a classification enclave shift to secure but unclassified, and our requirements to transmit, store, and assure data at the secure but unclassified level. I think the most important aspect of data, as CW5 Houston alluded to, is prioritization of data. Transmitting and sharing combat information that closes kill chains is the prioritization of data, and I think that we have to figure out a way to get after speed for lethality as it pertains to data. That's target detection, that's target identification, that's classification, that's geolocation of at machine speed to enable our EW warfighters to protect, strike targets if required, as well as to protect our forces. And I think that's enabled by AI and ML. I think we've got to explore exactly what that looks like, but I think the ITN framework allows us to enable this multi-band distributed mesh data-centric network that we're employing at divisions in order to support those requirements. Intel, EW, and Signal professionals are all leveraging the ITN to share that data easier, faster, and more convenient than ever before in my career. And I think SBUE enables us to bridge that gap between partners and allies that we anticipate fighting with in the next conflict. Additionally, at the division level, prevalence of unmanned and distributed aerial and ground sensors and platforms is going to shape the future conflict, as these systems require the robust, assured multiband C2 data and architecture, or sensor architecture network to rely on those sensors. And I think that's going to be mirrored by our adversaries, or is mirrored by our adversaries. And I think that shift to unmanned is transformative. Strategically, that shift follows a lot of the doctrinal changes to multi-domain operations, joint all-domain C2, convergence, these topics at the strategic level that translate to tactical problems. And the Army's MDMP, while sometimes slow and cumbersome, with a clearly defined end state and a problem statement, we're able to effectively answer those problem statements. And in my opinion, the problem statement we're discussing is how we can transform to the tactical level to provide robust, assured C2 data architecture in an integrated environment. And that's the tactical problem set. And then additionally, how do we detect, ID, locate, disrupt, prosecute targets disrupt our adversaries' ability to do the same. And I think this is America's strength. I think it's our creativity, our best, brightest minds in academia, industry, innovate, set conditions through technology to ensure that we're not reactionary and we're fielding solutions that make sense left of bang. And we have to think through this multifaceted problem set. The future conflicts, operational environment, defining what that looks like, adapt our formations to be lethal, and preserve the lives of our warfighters left of bang.
Good morning. I'll be a little bit more briefer. No, you're good. I'm Willie Newkirk. I'm the technical director for the Signal School, formerly the Command Chief Warrant Officer of 7th Signal Command. Talk a little bit about my job here at the Signal School, what we're charged with, right? All this transformation, all this new technology, right? The network of 2030, the Army of 2030. We need to ensure that we're training our soldiers on operationally relevant topics that help them when they get to their unit with all this new kit and the way the actual the formations are changing. And so do that and do it based on doctrine, and it will prepare us for success and increase our lethality.
Hey, good morning, everybody. CB4 Nate Watkins. Start a little bit about my background. So I joined the Army in 1996, and other than the fact it was a really long time ago, not really of any significance except for the fact that was a point in time when I came in as a cryptologic linguist, so voice intercept linguist. MI owned the EW discipline with that MOS as well, and since over the last couple decades it split, became part of FIRES, and then was wrestled back over to cyber. Now, so as I've kind of gotten back into the cyberspace, and it's kind of come full circle, and I've come back into contact with the EW mission role as well. What I do now within the G2, apologies in advance to Chief Ray Rivera, I stole his title. I'm not actually the STA, I'm the Senior SIGINT Advisor of G2. He's the Senior Technical Advisor. But I'm kind of speaking on his behalf in that capacity today. But as part of that role, and especially as we stand up 11th Cyber Battalion with that capability within their formation, a piece of that is how do we synchronize the intelligence warfighting function to mutually support the EW picture as well as communicate with Signal, because another piece of that mission that we have in the G2 is defensive cyber operations. So we have that very tight connectivity in there. So it's bridging those functions to have discussions with staff that we as MI professionals have not traditionally had, and that's that close discussion about what is the adversary threat effect, be it through the network or over the air against friendly command control systems as well. And then conversely, how do we assess the adversary's command control systems in order to develop capability to counter those through the EMS, through electronic warfare space. So those are principally the topic areas I'm going to discuss today. Thanks.
Thank you very much, panelists. That is a lot of talent and a lot of knowledge up here today. I can't wait to see how this goes. As mentioned to everyone, this is the Warrant Officer Technical Panel for TechNet. EW and Signal at division and below, collecting, analyzing, deciphering, communicating, and transmitting relevant data. We have a couple of questions that we'll be asking the panelists. They can answer at will or abstain if they wish. It is a free-for-all now, gentlemen. And then after a couple of those questions, we will get to questions from the audience. So if you've got questions on your mind, please be ready to ask them. For the first one, how is EW, Signal, and SIGINT changing to meet the transformation and contact efforts of the Army?
All right, well I'll start off. From the Signal Regiment is transforming, the kit that's being fielded that you heard Chief Joe mention, so we're a little bit lighter, a little bit more agile, so we don't have that huge footprint. As well as personnel too as well. Right now, in the process of bringing back the division signal battalions, right? That's going to change things a lot too. But it's not going to happen all at once. All the divisions aren't going to be doing it at one time. And right now, a good proof of concept is what 101st is doing and what they've done in Operation Lethal Eagle. And so that's a small piece of what's happening now in order to get us where we need to be while the Army is transforming in contact. So go ahead. I'm good. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for going first. So from a Army EW standpoint, I think a couple of highlights that are important. We've been working on, building depth within the organization for quite some time now. One of the primary things, and I don't get a commission for saying this, but I wish I did, a regulation that we worked on for about 7 years, 525-24, was published in July of last year. Why do I bring that up all the time? Because it widens out the aperture for what EW can do, which helps out with the dynamic environment that we're going against. So now EW operators can do demodulation and what's called signal external parameter analysis. Why is that important? I kind of highlighted it in my opening statement with talking about EW reprogramming. We need to be able to look at things from an EW standpoint and figure out how to break them within the EMS. Are we going to do that alone? No, not necessarily. We're going to have to partner with our SIGINT folks, but we're going to have to see what we can do as much as possible at the lower classification levels so we can, be rapidly adjusting to whatever that target set is. The other piece that we're doing through our cyber that I became aware of, I've only been in our cyber for about a month now. There are about 3 or 4 different efforts that are going on. One is the EW data, I don't know if we want to call it EW data or RF data pilot. They've changed it a couple of times. So RF data pilot is where our EW entities will be collecting certain types of RF data, putting it in a repository for SIGINT to reach into and do their mission, but also enable our EW reprogrammers, our 17 deltas, 170 deltas, to reach in there and do the same, right? The other one is a little bit more nascent right now. It's been working for a little while, but the EW reprogramming enterprise is something that's coming online as well. So how do we take those 17 delta, 170 deltas, and perhaps 17 echo, 170 bravos, and again, perhaps a 35 Sierra, 352 Sierra, get them into a single entity so they can converge on target sets so that we're not just looking at how to exploit things from a SIGINT perspective, but we're looking at how to break things from an EW perspective. I'll pause there.
Yeah, I'll reinforce you. I think EW has been transforming my entire career. So transforming context, not a new for us in the EW world. The last 15 years, whether it was crew and the reprogramming required for crew to save lives, whether it's the QRC and ONS capabilities we're fielding in order to inform future requirements. I think what's critical from a fielding or how SIGINT's evolving, or SIGINT and EW is evolving, is ensuring that we're capturing the observation levers while we're having units like 2101 going to JRTC with new equipment. Ensure that the lessons that are learned through our EW formations are translated into the JSIDs and acquisitions process to inform requirements in order to anticipate technology changes or changes. That's all. Outside of that is reprogramming.
So I'm going to go off of.
No, go ahead.
I'm going to piggyback off of what Chief Newkirk was saying about the capabilities, especially when it's coming down to C2 fix and unified networks. C2 fix, right? So we had a bunch of old equipment. Got it. We got new equipment, right? What does that mean for you as a net tech or you as a 255 alpha or et cetera? That means that you are going to be you're going to be in charge of making sure that your unit knows how to fight with that equipment. MOS insignificant. Radios, I always tell my team, radios are going to be used, and that is what 2101 leverages heavy. Not so much having a bunch of antennas out so that you're constantly, with respect to EW, constantly emitting in one area like TSM does, and everybody knows TSM is very, very hot and it needs sparkles. But using your beyond line of sight capability, your HF, your MUOS, leveraging that constellation to send data, fire missions. Also using the MUOS constellation for more than just fire missions. You can use it to send tracks, CDLIM to Q64s, doing target acquisition from Q53 to FATIDs, MILTOPE to FATIDs. That's all possible with the new technologies. Additionally, Field artillery. So field artillery fires. You're going to be if you're in a DIVARTY, you're going to have that cross-domain solution. What does that mean? You're going to have that trick box. You're going to have that SBU enclave attached to you. When you're downward reinforced with the SNN team from the brigade or the division signal battalion, or downward reinforced, what does that look like? You're going to have an SNN team at your disposal. They're going to do their job. You're going to cross domain with them. You're going to educate them on how to implement that solution so that you can translate fires through ADP gateway or whatever solution. Just a couple nuggets to get the signal side.
And to reinforce kind of a bigger theme like within this, so as organizations are doing that field testing and training, capture best practices within their organizations for what they're doing, speaks to a bigger piece of what the current equipment fielding process looks like, and a lot of that is still nested in QRC for systems. So without getting into the spectrum of what everybody is employing, we kind of look at it more from looking at it from the ASCC G2 level, kind of nested in that national to tactical intelligence integration piece as well. So how do we move that data from the FLOT back to where it can be both analyzed by intelligence, because basically what we're looking at is making unknowns into knowns through that process, and then feeding those characterized identifiers back to the front so that they can then use that to tune equipment, excuse me, and turn that into battlefield information that can be communicated in real time back to the commander for those operational decisions that are required there. So the piece of that challenge is what does that architecture look like? What is the mechanism through which we work to standardize that so that we can have a much more reliable network on the back end, communicating in both directions to make sure that information is as relevant as possible. So that's kind of what we're looking at through RF/EW, name du jour, data pilot within Army Cyber Command right now, as we're looking at that backhaul piece, and then how do we appropriately separate that data or dual route that data such that Intel can apply the Intel question to it, characterize it, and identify it, or at the same time that the EW cohort can provide that electronic support using that information as well. So that's kind of a bigger picture challenge that we're working on right now, and trying to do it iteratively as we go through planning and employing teams out in the space to support warfighters, rotations through NTC, JRTC, et cetera, and get that capture so we can inform our process.
Appreciate that, Chief. And talking about data leads right into the next question. What types of data are a priority for divisions and below, and how is that data collected, transmitted, and defended?
I'll go first. I'll go first again. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about how that data actually defended from a signal perspective, right, and what's going on now with the Army Unified Network. So priority of data, first I'm going to say, is going to be determined by the commander's requirements. So they should set priority. And I'm sure my battle buddies up here can chime on the different types of that they experience too, and that the commander utilize in order to in order to do what they need to do as far as enable mission command, right? So in defense of the network and the data, there's regional access points at every RHN that are going to be standing up that's going to be part of the unified SIM. And so the telemetry from the systems that produce this data should be sent from the division to the RHNs, and that will allow the local defenders at the division to get out the defense of the network, as well as that gives the global cyber center and the regional cyber centers the ability, more eyes on it, to actually defend that network and look for adversaries and look for behaviors of malicious cyber actors and things of that nature. So I'll start with that and then allow the rest of the team to chime in.
I think from the EW standpoint, it's, as you said, commander's priority. I think what I have noticed from the ITN and our requirements for vendor solutions and QRC capabilities is there's not always a way to analyze or prioritize the data that you contribute to that picture, whether that's targeting info, whether that's PLI data. The throughput of whatever radio system or communication system is what the throughput is. And I think we have to be able to have some sort of metric to dial that back as required to support the commander's operations. And that's LPI, LPD, waveform dependent, redundancy. That's in a disaggregated, degraded, denied environment.
Yeah, so I kind of highlighted some of this whenever I was first doing the opening as well. From a prioritization standpoint, and I'm not speaking for commanders here, but what I would think is your force protection type data, are we in danger? Number two, targeting data, where are they at so we can do something about it? And then the third piece is what kind of unknowns, to highlight what Mr. Watkins mentioned down there, what unknowns do we have in the spectrum that we need to make known? That'll take a higher level of fidelity on that particular thing, the IQ file, so the raw information coming off the EMS. That affects what kind of bandwidth that you need. Thankfully we have signalers to provide that capability when we need it and where we need it. So I would think, from a prioritization standpoint, it'll vary from mission to mission, but I think if we home in on the protect ourselves and find the enemy, I think those will be like an easy win for bubbling those up to the top.
Okay, so priorities of data for division and below. Depending at what warfighting function you're at, fire is obviously priority is digital fires, so ensuring you have a pace for those digital fires. Whether it's SBU or SIPR, it doesn't matter. Prioritize either for digital fires. PLI data was already mentioned, and then where specifically will those transmitters be? Having an antenna farm, having it displaced, having decoys is also a good one, so that you're under or you're able to divert destruction to your primaries. And then lastly, COP data. Is that TAC? Is that data packages from TAC? How is that getting translated? What tools and plugins do we have to make sure that it gets translated appropriately? And bandwidth was also mentioned. Fire missions only need kilobits, so that's why radios are also a really good primary/alternate.
Thank you, Chiefs. Really appreciate that. Several of you mentioned the data as a priority by the commander and following that priority. Going with those priorities, how does Signal, EW, and MI analyze and decipher that relevant data, and how are those results and efforts communicated between branches and organizations in the battle space?
So I don't know if I have the answer for all of that, but we did a pilot called Starblazer a few years back. And the idea behind that was, how do you take an unknown with the environment, ship that back to an enclave, and develop a capability against that in a rapid fashion? So that kind of highlights that relationship between what the EW community does and what the SIGINTers need to do as well. I've built a little, very rudimentary triangle chart. So if you think about data within the EMS being raw signals, the concept that I'm trying to pitch forward is when it's first contact, unless it's a protected source or method of getting after that information, it should start off as being considered as a yes. So electromagnetic support, that lifts off a lot of the potential boundaries with classification, those type of things that come into mind. As you start applying different analytic techniques and processing that SIGINT does, then it graduates into SIGINT, right? So the idea is that we want to do as much as we can at the lower classification levels up to a certain standpoint, and then push that into the system that's a little bit more restrictive for a lot of good reasons, so that we can get that data flow going quicker and faster than what we have in the past.
Yeah, I believe that this is where, in my opinion, the Army has the most potential for growth. There's so many stovepipes of data, and we have mutually supporting requirements, whether it's the transport of data, whether it's the security or assuredness of data, whether it's providing combat information or intelligence. All of those are mutually supporting efforts, I believe, between everyone on this panel and the branches on this panel. But I believe the solutions that are fielded to the Army aren't informed by everyone's branch on this panel. To me, it seems as if there is a disconnect between the ITN and its availability to us was incredible. It was great. I love the ITN. However, I think there's a way to inform future fielding as it pertains to signal requirements to ensure that we have the speed to ID and target adversaries and data bandwidths to provide commanders options for force protections, indications, and warning, to ensure we have redundancy in comms, data, and C2 architectures. And I believe that's all informed. We just have stovepipes. Even at the division level, as me and Mr. Noah were discussing earlier, is same division. He was in G6. I'm in G39, and there's a stovepipe even within the division staff level. Much less as it pertains to acquisitions between branches.
From the military intelligence perspective, a lot of that work is actually it's being done now. So separate the national air away from that and focus at theater and below that. So theater brigades are enduring, and they do a lot of that work now. Expeditionary brigades also, even with their force modernization as support, IAW battalions, direct support to corps and divisions as the primary tactical formations. With that, they're still afforded that connectivity to be able to do that, because unfortunately for a lot of that, especially in the SIGINT space, we're very heavily reliant on external connectivity to be able to access the databases needed and the tools and processes needed in order to conduct that mission. So what does that mean for trying to tailor a force into being something very modular and highly mobile in the battle space? Creates a challenge, especially in the DDoS environment where you might not have that reputable connectivity going back there. So a lot of that tradecraft and onus depends a lot on that pre-deployment understanding of your target space. So especially germane to signal and EW, you're looking at your electronic order of battles, like really developing those, and also nesting in with the S2s doing that mission analysis to understand the enemy threat template. So even in the possibility of not having that connectivity, you can still make an analytic judgment, in the very least, given the information you have on hand, to be able to inform the commander and let the commander make decisions based on the understanding of the environment.
Thank you, gentlemen, very much. I do have a couple more questions, but depending on, I want to make sure the audience has plenty of time to engage, so if there are questions in the audience, please let me know. I will bring a mic to you to ask so that the questions can go into the recording for this session.
So General George has said that the network is Army's #1 modernization effort. And some people might say, hey, that means Signal's got to fix themselves. Now, having been out to OLE and talking to the G6 there, some of the early insights were that they had faith in the network but not in the data flows. And you have demonstrated, Chief Joe, so I'm going to put the pin the rose on you here, you've demonstrated good knowledge of all the different warfighting functions and your place in helping the Army figure it out. Can you provide some vignettes of how the 101st became, and I hate using a buzzword, became a learning organization to work together to tackle getting the network right?
That's correct. So vignettes, you're talking about data that wasn't the data integrity across enclaves.
How did you learn and understand what they needed out of you to help correct it? Or what you needed out of you?
But, okay, I understand. So are you talking, okay, I see what you're talking about now. So requirements, right? So requirements for my subordinate FA battalion. So paint the scenario real quick. FA battalion was executing a live fire exercise. During that live fire exercise, there was data flows going up and down. In between the FA battalion and the Divardi, who was controlling the fires and the guns during the the exercise. There was our cross-domain solution was translating from CIPR to SBU. That's what you're referring to, right? Okay. In that vignette, in that example, and this was real. Upon doing more testing, there was data integrity where your 10-digit grid would turn into a 6, and that, if you know fires, is a huge margin of error and is not reliable data. Also, if you were to do a round count, rounds would not translate appropriately. So 20 rounds left at the gun on the green side, red side would default to 0. And that was not a fault of the equipment itself. It was a programming error on the CDS, because a FATEDS was being used as VMF 1617 Charlie. It was not being used as a FATEDS data protocol. And if you know anything about FATEDS, it can talk multiple languages, but it only likes to talk a FATEDS data protocol. So that was something we pushed back to the PM, and they gave us another a solution that JRTC. Does that answer your question?
I wanted to show how you work together with the other warfighting functions to solve the problem.
Oh,
Warrant officers are great at figuring things out, but in order to get the data flows correctly, you have to work with the actual end users to get the correct effect, and that way they're fighting with the network they're given rather than fighting the network they were given.
Next question.
Yes, good morning. I am Chief Harrison. I'm a SIGINT tech out of 10th Brigade, 10th Mountain 1st Brigade. And as we're having this panel, I'm kind of hearing a lot of pieces touch on some of the struggles we have, but I'm not feeling like I understand it at our level, and I'm hoping the big Army is kind of solving these problems. We mentioned a lot about sharing battlefield information across between SIGINT and EW, and there are some specific lines drawn, but what are we doing to kind of streamline that as NSA still kind of tries to close hold and keep a lot of their information more compartmentalized? And along that same lines, are we doing anything to kind of layer our titles and authorities between EW and SIGINT so we can start working more readily together and speeding up that process?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. So I think, we're in the process. I don't know exactly where we're at in that storyline, but again, like the regulation I mentioned was a huge step forward for us. That opened up a lot of doors. Now, what I'm noticing about a lot of the NSA policies, they reference, if you're not part of NSA CSS, this doesn't apply to you, right? So what we're finding on our side, on the EW side, is there's a lot of tendency to reference back into the SIGINT policy, going, hey, that applies, but whenever you read it closely, it does not apply. So that means that we're, to your point, we have to work on what our policies are. Classifications, all that kind of stuff. There are classification guides and whatnot. So I'm part of the RF data pilot policy team now. So I'll probably be visiting Nate quite often and picking his brain on what are the things that we need to put in place, or what would facilitate this sharing of data easier and quicker. And to your point, how do we layer those things together so it's not prohibitive for the EW community, and it's not causing the SIGINT community concern, what are you guys doing over there? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I'll add, I think it's also a personality-based. SIGINT Tech and EW Tech, each formation figures out a way that works. And in my experience, it's always been driven by, as CW5 Houston mentioned, a requirement to ingest at SBU or the lowest level, so that you're not as restricted as it pertains to policy. So if we ingest at SBUE and then move up classified enclaves, it's much easier than ingesting at the highest level. And that is a way that we've been after, at least in 25th Infantry, to be able to get after that, essentially ingesting ES, whether you're a SIGINT soldier or an EW soldier, ingesting ES at the SBU level in order to move that cross-enclave. I think it eliminates a lot of the policy burden behind it.
Sticking to more. Does that mean that we're trying to keep SIGINT sticking closer to an ES role in the brigade and division echelons before we start looking at a higher level?
Not necessarily. In a sense, because, just to distill the thing, like SIGINT can also, as task, provide the ES picture, but there's an equities piece in that as well. Do you want them doing that, or do you want them doing SIGINT? And it depends on your staffing, what you have, capability, capacity, actually in doing that regard. So I think a lot in that role, that's going to be a command-driven decision for what that balance looks like with it. But again, getting back into that national tactical integration piece, how much of that requirements picture is being developed, at the theater level, or even at the EMIB level, or what national has to offer with that, because, not really mentioning this, there's a whole space discussion with this as well, that they also have equities in that. So, ultimately, that's the discussion that the SIGINT and the EW at the organizational level will have to do in planning with the command to understand what that balance looks like based on other entities that can satisfy the requirement. Doesn't really give you much room to maneuver with that. It's choose your own adventure in a sense, but yeah.
Thank you.
So I've seen a lot of this AI processing at the sensor level. So do you see a promise in AI breaking out electronic warfare support data, ES data, signal externals versus the internals, which then helps you on the processing and classification and to deal with it more at the edge? Do you see that as a thing going forward? And even just here at the AFCEA TechNet, are you even seeing some vendors with that capability? And are you, as technical experts, looking for that yourself to see what can happen?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump on that one. So throughout this entire process of getting an AR written and enabling EW operators to do the demodulation and signal external parameter analysis, the core aspect of that whole thing was automation is going to win the speed fight for us, right? So the faster you can figure these things out, the less cognitive load it is on the soldier themselves, the more things they can get done through the systems that are available to them. So by all means, AI and ML are going to inform the way ahead. I have seen some products. I haven't seen any here. I haven't had a chance to go down on the floor yet. But there are some companies out there that are pursuing AI ML for EMS emitter identification, and in some cases processing, which gets into the SIGINT side of the house.
Yeah, I'll provide some reinforcing fires. I think speed is lethality, right? The faster we can do things like automated target recognition, alleviate workload from a detection location standpoint, that's lethality, especially as emitters pervade whatever the future conflict looks like, right? I have seen the workload of EW SIGINT personnel when there is a congested environment where they're not fed a lot of prior information of the target set of what they're looking for. And anything we can do to help our warfighters alleviate that concern at the tactical level, I think, is machine speed driven.
Here you go, ma'am.
Thank you very much. A question I had is, I've noticed you've got a lot of great organizations here. How are you guys, when you're looking at technologies and stuff to answer these problems, considering and linking back into Army Futures Command? Because I just came from General Ellis's and Mr. Kirk's conversation. They talked a lot about Division C2, data flow, and that type of thing, and they've got a lot of things going on there.
Yeah, so that's absolutely part of our mission in life, is to inform leaders and other organizations on the things that we're seeing on the horizon line. The other piece is, as you mentioned, AFC is they're the way ahead, right? So we interface with the ACMs, ACM EW, ACM Cyber from the schoolhouse perspective. I don't know if the new commandant, man, my brain doesn't want to think of his name right now. It starts with yeah, there we go. I was like, it's not Hodney. Yeah, Colonel Hosey took over. I don't know if one of his hats is still to interface with the CDID, but under General Weil, that was one of the things that General Stanton put on him. So in that case, we would have the schoolhouse interface with the ACMs, and then from the R Cyber standpoint, I'm still learning what the TWC does and how they would interface with ACM, but I think there's probably some linkage there as well.
Anybody else? We got time for a couple more.
Yep, Chief Alex, 513. So my experience with AI and ML models, it takes a long time to train them. So I guess my question is, as we acquire these models and try to implement them, what's our plan to train them? My experience is that we need analysts really sitting there correcting the model for a long time. So that's just really my question. How do we plan to train the models to be smart in the future?
Yeah, so this is a question I posed to the group yesterday for the Warrant Officer panel on the Delta side of the house. There's going to be a CTSSB in the spring of next year for our 17 Delta 170 Deltas, and one of the things that I pose is like, how do we handle the AI ML thing? Should that be a senior work role qualification? The other thing that I've been seeing is I reviewed a paper for DCO and cyber, or defense and cyber, I think it was, and they had referenced AI ML within that particular paper, but it only said leveraging AI ML. So your point, how do we get people where they're at least cognizant of how to leverage AI, but then also how do you train it and how do you get it so you can validate whether that output is correct or not? I think that's going to be a foundational piece at all the schoolhouses, be it if you're a 35 series, 17 series, or even a 25 series. How are we going to see this thing sprinting off into the sunset and catch up with that and link in with that? So one of the main things that I'm aware of are CTSSBs. So when those CTSSBs roll around, we definitely want to bring up AI ML, and to your point, what fidelity do you need to know how to operate it? So if you're training it for signals, you probably need to know quite a bit about how signals work and the back end of that. And then same thing with the network, and same thing with the cyber side of the house. So I think it's, I feel like we're behind on this a little bit, but seeing some of the programs that are out there, I think we have the ability to catch up relatively quickly. We just have to get those, if you're doing KSATs within your CTSSB, or if you're doing topic learning like we do on the cyber side of the house, those topics have to be included so that we actually focus on them during the initial training and intermediate training that we have in PME.
Anybody else? Oh.
Good afternoon, it's Warrant Officer Warren Cotter. So my question is, with all of the funding and focus that's going into space right now, and with them kind of operating in every single environment that we'll be operating, whether it ends up being a joint fight or not at our level, is there any efforts currently that are working on getting sensor-to-shooter data from some of the space systems or space organizations that will help us on the battlefield?
So when you're saying sensor-to-shooter space data, having a space, can you just clarify that piece real quick?
So currently, there's a lot of systems and money going into space acquisition and space units, even locally in different AOs, and they're gathering a lot of data in the EMS. And right now, it's going into stovepipe databases on the Space Force side that we can query and break into, but it's not organically flowing into the Army at all, even though they're inherently going to be part of our fight. So I'm wondering if there's any efforts to try to get that more organically fed into our systems and our databases.
Yeah, I think I can speak, at least allude to that at the division level at 25th. We struggled with this, and I think it's, as we talk about the enclave interdependency, that's the difficulty, right? It's if you ingest at the lowest level and then classify that data, it's easier than moving down. So that's a struggle.
Yeah, so we didn't have the thought process for data per se, and I'm going to highlight something that I think has kind of died on the vine, but SMDC was a focal point for us for a hot minute. We tried to get one of our warrant officers in there. That plan kind of went sideways. There was also like some talk about potentially reallocating some of the 35 Sierras and 25 Sierras, I think it was, to do intel support to space, and then bring in 17 Echoes to fill that gap. Again, that was like when I was in the Chief Warrant Officer branch position. It seemed like it gained some momentum and just kind of died on the vine. I think part of the problem that we have sometimes is things get put in place and it causes a little bit of, like, to highlight what Grant mentioned earlier, stovepiping of thoughts and processes and those type of things. So as you mentioned, that data is highly important. We just got to continue working that problem set. The people way may not be the right answer. You may not have to actually be on site to actually get after that. But then down the route that I mentioned earlier with policy, to the point of data flows, having sat in the 706 MI group a few years ago, we had a person, actually a small team of about 3 people dedicated to data flow. So if we get after that, then I think policy and data flow, that might open that up. But I think, you hit on a weak area for us.
So I can elaborate a little bit. So I think it was even released a while back that the Army is pursuing a space MOS. You aware that we do have a space cadres out there at some of the former Air Force bases, the Space Force bases like Peterson, and we send signal ears and intel and think air defense soldiers there to work episodically for one tour where it takes them a year and a half to be brought up to speed to do some of the work you're talking about. And so the proposal was to make a space MOS, which we totally supported, that they do that. That way they can hit the ground running. So there's more information out there in the ether. I think that was finally approved, but don't hold me to that. So it's the fruits out of what you were just discussing with the sending those folks there.
Here you go, sir. Gentlemen, good afternoon. Warrant Officer One Haft. I'm in the Wobic course presently. Something I wanted to get your impression of as you're all speaking to brigade, division, maybe even corps commanders as we kind of move into this new era of warfare, heavily informed by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, of course. Do you see an evolution in this current crop of commanders at that level starting to understand that they might not have the granularity, depth, and width of information that they had in previous conflicts, that Ukraine 2024 looks completely different from an Iraq or an Afghanistan in 2020, that there might be situations in which we're pushing a scout or sniper platoon into a hide site in a forested area on the side of a mountain, and their reach back or their contact with that element might be a Boris report sent over an HF radio once every week or so. Obviously, it's not our place to condition the commander's expectations. We fulfill the commander's expectations. Of course, that doesn't alleviate us of our responsibility to continue making the network better. But do all of you starting to see perhaps an evolution in the commander's understanding what will be possible for data throughputs, informational detail in these more contested and heavily degraded environments?
Okay, I just told Grant that he could take the questions from here on out, but I'll jump on this, having been around a couple of folks. Yeah, it's definitely an observation from Ukraine-Russia conflict that the fidelity of data that we used to trust and love may not be available for targeting purposes. So does that mean it's that scout report, or is that a single DF fix? I don't know. That's probably where the law of warfare will come into place in your engagement practices and whatnot. So I think we'll have to do a little bit of experimentation. Like if we're in the throes of LISCO and the artillery's coming day and night, your scope probably opens up quite a bit on that. But I think at least in the early times that we're seeing right now, people are starting to become mindful of. Yeah, maybe we don't have full motion video on something. Maybe we don't have that refined location or whatever, but we know they're there. Maybe we fly a little UAV in, take a peek, and figure it out. So I think that conflict is definitely changing the way people are thinking, and I am hearing and seeing folks kind of talk along those lines.
this may be contentious. I believe I anticipated exactly what you described, right? A transition back to soldiering, a transition to basics, right? Reconnaissance principles and establishing hide sites and comms windows and brevity and the MCON procedures that we anticipated. But my experience operationally has not been the case. The ITN provides a very connected network that is always talking, that is out there, that's passing data continuously. And there's still a requirement from commanders to see PLI data down. So as I anticipated a shift in that, that is not what my observations personally have been.
So I'm going to defer to Chief Joel because he's living it right now. And I actually spoke to the 101st, Division Commander, and he's along those mindsets of what's happening, And so I don't see any issues, but I'm going to defer to you because you're actually living it now.
Yeah, thank you. So to answer your question, is your initial question was commanders changing their mindset. I think the feedback I have to offer you is commanders have more options now. Commanders have the ability to either utilize or leverage MUOS directional antennas. You're going to be fielded omnidirectionals. You're going to be 360. Everybody's going to see you. The EW guys are going to love you, by the way. But just leverage your directional antennas, and that will assist you in not so much being hidden or not in the spectrum. You're going to get seen. It's just how are you going to be seen in the ratio, right? TSM, I mentioned earlier, is always on. It's always going to blip. It's always going to blip. You're going to have your PLI from that always constantly on. How are you going to do as a commander? How are you going to protect your troops and ensure that the assets for the higher headquarters commander, he can leverage you as an asset? So having your comms windows, like you said, once a week or something, that's going to be dictated by the commander's intent. Just now he has 3 or 4 options as opposed to him only having 1 option. And with it being more small form factor, and he's able to get that data there faster and more modular. He'll have MiFi. If you're in an urban environment, you're trying to blend in with the populace, you'll have your MiFi capability. If you need BLOS capability, MUOS, Starshield, Tampa Microwave, whatever is at your disposal, use it smart. Give the commander that option. Advise him what his risks are, and let that commander assume that risk. I don't know if that answers your question. That was kind of
Thank you very much for the answer. Yeah, if that's, and you know more about this because SIGINT's hard, right? So like the capabilities of SIGINT are very heavy. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, this works better. So the SIGINT interaction with Signal has always been tough, right? And every unit I've ever been in, it's hard to even get a clear answer from your SIGINT guys like, hey, what do we even look like with this piece of equipment in this area, because it's very heavily classified. So if that is a situation where these MUOS pieces of equipment, where these JBCPs, these pieces of equipment are defeating what we believe the Russian or Chinese capability in those theaters would look like, then yeah, good to go. But I know we do expect both of these countries in that LSCO fight that we anticipate to be very advanced. And I was just like, that's where the conversation kind of turns to, right? Do we expect these pieces of equipment to defeat their DF capability, their SIGINT capability, in these highly contested environments where we're not on our home turf anymore? We're in eastern Ukraine, we're in Taiwan, we're in these places where they have an overwhelming advantage. So that's, I think, what the big piece starts to be is, against Iran, against like a future like low-scale, small-scale warfare, no big deal, we'll be dominant. But in these other places against these more capable adversaries, that's where, like, does this JBCP-centric, ITN-centric infrastructure, is that going to work in those areas? And that's, I think, where the conversation goes at that point. I believe you if you say it does. I'm not saying you're wrong.
It does.
Yeah, I think there's 2 trains of thought here. It's either you hide in plain sight or you don't talk at all, right? I mean, there's your options. You either hide in plain sight or you don't talk at all. And I don't think, I anticipated not talking at all being one of those MCON observations, and that's just not my experience. I think it's hiding in plain sight because we're data-centric. We require data to fight. We require indications and warnings. We require support to targeting. We require things that are sensor-driven, and I think we have to do a better job of hiding in plain sight.
Going back to your question, right? So knowing what you look at, you don't have to go specifically to your SIG-inters to look at your spectrum. While we were doing OLE, our spectrum manager highlighted our actual spectrum using CRFS spectrum node. If you don't know what that is, Google it, CRFS, same dudes that have, or same company that has Silvus in their pocket. Really great tool to see what you look like on the spectrum. And he was able to capture and see our side lobes and see what we are actually transmitting, where we are on the spectrum, what our ratio is, and what would be the best option for us. And then comparing that with our counterpart, our EW counterparts, like if I was using this, what are the chances of me getting detected and prosecuted right away? And then you can kind of game plan when you're doing your MDMP, doing your IPRs, because you should be doing your IPRs with your G35, right? So make sure that those questions are brought up when you're doing your IPRs, and then those technologies are out there. So, yeah.
That brings us to the end of our time for the session. I want to thank all of the panelists. Can we please get a round of applause for these fantastic panelists?